welcome to episode 4 of the St. Charles podcast. I'm Eric Wood,
Father Mark Brown.
and today we are here to talk about the history of our parish at St. Charles.
Right.
It's a fascinating story that takes us back to the mid-70s, late 70s, where
78.
lots of issues are becoming paramount in the Episcopal Church.
Right.
And things that had been put off for a while come to a head in the form of a new prayer book and a lot of other issues involving women's ordination.
Right.
Do I have that right, Father?
Yep, that's pretty much correct. And the new prayer book had 2 different rites in it. There's a couple of books out there, neither formulary or orthodox. It was written by Episcopal priests at the time, talking about the 79 prayer book and how it, in one of the rites, it kind of, in both of them, watered down things like original sin and the baptism. How another issue they had was how the Anglican Church, the Episcopal Church, wanted to be like the Roman Catholic Church, so they changed where the priest was. They changed the calendar to make it more Roman Catholic. That's why you don't see some of the old Anglican feast days in the Episcopal Church anymore, because when Rome took away, circumcision and gave it to all the Holy Family, well, that's what they did, and they have a kind of a sideline. Oh yeah, down here it is. So they're trying to fit in more with the Roman Catholics, which was interesting since the Orthodox and Roman Catholics were entering into a kind of a discussion with the Episcopal Church, and then they turned around and started ordaining women, and everybody's like, yeah, we're done.
It's like the culmination of the 3-branch theory is on the cusp of fruition.
Right.
And then the rug is pulled out.
The rug is pulled out by the Episcopal Church. Now, this parish began with people from
Nativity.
right up here, and then St. Stephen's, which is further south. They first started meeting in a house on Franklin, just south of here. They were meeting in James Clark's home. He was organized it. The first priest that came up, I think it was from Birmingham, Bill Marvin. And the bishop that gave them oversight was an Episcopal bishop from the Southeast Diocese named Bishop, didn't find his first name, Watterson. And he gave them oversight from 78 to 82, when they then in 82 joined the continuing church with the prophets Christ the King. So they started at a house. They began thinking about how we're going to do this, and they started growing. They eventually went to a kind of like a gas station slash cleaning station. It was owned by a law firm here, if I can find the name of it, Herring Law Firm. One of the sponsors, or maybe he was a member, we don't have a member's roll from back then, allowed them to use this. They renovated it and turned it into kind of a church, and then they started looking for something more permanent, and they found this parcel of land, which is actually North Huntsville. It still is, but it was not as developed, and they were able to get this, and all of the things you see here, the parishioners found through, back then they didn't have the internet, so it was trade things, agricultural. Like these rafters these trusses came from 2 farmhouses that were built in the 1840s down in, here in Madison County. I'm trying to find the name of where it was. Like Farley? Yeah, Farley, here in Madison County.
Those 1980s Episcopalians had taste and money.
Yes, they did. And they designed this church on an actual Anglican church in Virginia. It was built in 1675, called the Merchant Church. Mm-hmm. So this is based upon a rural Anglican parish. The bricks, I've gotten 2 different stories and 2 different things. Some say the bricks came from downtown when they were renovating and gutting the historical buildings. Others said it came from the mill fire that happened in 84.
They look old.
They are. These bricks have been dated to the 1850s. So that would probably fit with like downtown Huntsville or the mill. Mm-hmm. Because that's a lot of Huntsville, things like that were built and have been around for that's 150 years. Well, it was 150 years, 40 years ago, so almost 200 years now. They had another priest, Father Husk, who came in, and then Mr. Clark went into holy orders.
He was a parishioner at Nativity that was in the founders.
You're right. He became a lay reader. So when they didn't have a priest, they didn't have a priest every Sunday, because they'd have to come from Birmingham, because none of the priests in the Episcopal Church here in Huntsville would do anything with them. So they would come from other areas. He finally, I think it was Bishop Watterson, encouraged him to go into the apostolacy. And he became a deacon. Later he became a priest here, the first full-time priest here, and eventually became the bishop of the diocese by the 1990s.
The Atlantic side?
The Atlantic side, right. Excuse me. So he served that. He brought in a priest Martyr from the Church of England, who left the Church of England in 1994. I read his resignation letter. It was blistering, what was going on in the Church of England back in 94. We look at it now and go, oh my gosh, look how crazy they are. Back in 94, when he wrote a letter to his bishop, he said the reason he's leaving is because, one, the ordination of women, the blatant homosexuality, the denial of the virgin birth, and this was like Church of England 1994. And he was based, had a hard time leaving them, but he came here and he served here for a few years. And then we went through other, priests, mainly Anglo-Catholic priests like Les Maccabee. I think after him was Steve Victory, who was not as Anglo-Catholic, and he left. And then for 7 years they didn't have a priest. They had one that would rotate in once a month, and
That's tough.
yeah. Well, Deacon Clancy kept this place going. He retired probably the year I got here. As soon as I got here, first thing out of his mouth, I'm retiring. And I was like, oh, don't retire now. I just got here. I need some help. And he was beyond retirement age. So he retired, and then I've been here since. The church has gone up and down. Their first Easter in 1984, they had close to 100 people here. If you can find some of the old records, record keeping wasn't that good here. Still find huge gaps in the records that I can't, kind of say this is what was going on here. We're finding boxes of records all over the place, and somebody will bring a box later. You need to go through these. Just found another box of records. So our history is being pieced together slowly. There's a timeline that they put on the website. It's probably 20 to 30 pages of information on how we formed, where we got the material from. Everything you see in here, the pews were given to us by another church. But if you look at all the woodwork you see, the altar rails and all that were built by the parishioners. They built their own sawmill to do it. They horse traded to get the foundation. They got a company that works with clay, needs clay for construction work, and it's just the right type of clay. They said, well, if you come and take it out, you can have it. We won't charge you for it, but if you take it out, that's how we got our basement. And they excavated it for free.
Very nice.
Yeah, and another company, the Steel Corporation, came in and helped with the main foundational work and everything you see in here. The parishioners kind of put it together, painted, their own money, giving tens of thousands of dollars out of their own pockets. The church is debt-free, no mortgage. It's one of the few churches that can say that because of the parishioners and how they were so faithful. Every vestment you see, every holy item, every vessel that's here, the parishioners found it somewhere. Now, all those parishioners are gone. They're no longer with us.
Because we're talking late 70s, early 80s.
Right.
And this would be people in their 40s to 60s at that time.
Right. And so some of the folks that are still around from about that time period, the late 80s, they're in their late 80s now or in their 90s. Some of them in assisted living, some in memory care. The oldest people we have here, or I guess the oldest parishioners, I should say, have come in the early 2000s. It's very rare to find somebody who's been here more than 10 years now. Majority of the parish has been here less than three or
That's the
four.
turnover of the founding generation.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So yeah, when I learned in Baptist Seminary, you have founders. And they find it and they keep it and they keep it going. And then you'll have the others who are more the evangelists and coming along, and then the builders. So we're kind of getting into the building phase. They had builders before, but all the ups and downs, we're now back in a building phase. This carpet, I joked it was 1984. It was installed in 1984.
Believe it.
Yeah, so, and all the beveling you see, we had somebody come in and appraise it, just that beveling around the door between the narthex and the nave. They appraised it at like $50,000. That's some of this beveling glass is handmade and some of it's machine made. And you tell by the way you look at it, if it's got a green sheen, it means it's handmade, and another one it means it's not. So a lot of this was handmade by the parishioners. They created and made their own equipment, built their own sawmill, their own whatever it is, whatever you call this with the.
I wish we still had the root screen they built.
Yeah, they had it. People kind of tell me they didn't have a root screen. Then I found a picture, or old Bill found a picture of Bishop Clark standing right about there where the baptismal font is, with his crozier, and all around him is a root screen.
I think there was until the 80s. It's sometime in the 90s.
He was a bishop in the 90s. So that root screen was still there in the 90s. So what happened? There's nobody left here who knows what happened to it. They was taken down and don't know where it went.
So, Father, about a year ago, maybe a little more, I did some research on some historical documents that I had from Nativity.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a pretty honest breakdown from that perspective of what happened,
Yeah.
where there's a rector at Nativity that wants the new prayer book and decides to put it to a vote and thinks he's going to win the vote. But he didn't win the vote. He lost like 52-48 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And they wind up doing the prayer book anyway.
Yeah.
And that lit the fire in these people after that event.
Yes, yeah. Because when they continued with the 28 prayer book. Some of our prayer books here, you look at them, they're stamped from an Episcopal church, maybe around here, North Alabama, South Tennessee. When the Episcopal church was abandoning the 28, parishioners would find out, go in, collect them, and add to them. I think we bought very few of them. They were mainly just collected from the Episcopal church as they got rid of that wonderful prayer book and went to what they went to. When I was converting over, the first prayer book I picked up was the 79. I was like, okay. Then I hit the 28, and I thought, as a Baptist, I grew up with the King James. And I sit there, I'm looking and reading the 28, and I'm going, I can do. Had a Lutheran young man that was here last night for evening prayer. He just kind of came in with his daughter. And, I'm calling out, go to this, because you do have to flip and move. And afterwards, he said, I loved it. It was so reverent. It was intimate with God. Something I don't see I think he's right now was attending a Methodist church. And he said, I've heard other prayer books. And he's a young man. He's probably in his late 20s, early 30s. That's something, yes, the language can get hard. The Cloverdale Psalms, Psalter can get difficult to read, different grammar. Words sound the same but spelled differently, so you want to pronounce them differently, because people don't realize it wasn't until after the American Revolution that English got standardized in spelling and grammar.
The F and the S, like weird things. Like
Yeah,
that.
they'll have an S in there when it should be an N, like example. And so people say, example? No, example. They just put an S in there. Go read the 1549. You're like, I can't read this. Sound it out. It's the same word. You can read it if you just sound it out.
That's how I think it's called the Elkon Belisk, but the book that either St. Charles or someone very close to him right before his execution wrote, it has that kind of spelling in it.
Yeah,
It's really hard to follow.
Really hard to follow if you try to read it in a 21st century grammar sense. And some words mean different things. Now, back then, they do now. So it may sound odd because they haven't changed. The meanings have changed, but the words haven't. So you have to remember when you read that word, and like say the King James or the Cloverdale Psalter, it doesn't mean what it means in 21st century. So like if you see something in the Bible, and this is where progressives try to confuse everybody, that God and them, accept homosexuality. When they say in the King James or in the Cloverdale, and you see the word gay or something like that, it means happy.
Yeah.
And when I was a small child, it still meant happy. Okay, it wasn't until I was in the teenage years you started realizing they had changed it and opted the word, and now it means homosexual. So even in my lifetime, we still use the word as happy. Like one of the songs, Christmas songs, they put on their gay apparel.
It was like a name too, I think.
Yeah.
People would use it as a first name.
Yeah,
Female.
they would. All right. And so it meant something totally different. And gay, you named your daughter gay, you named her happy.
Yeah. You wouldn't do that now?
No, you can't do that now at all. So now one thing I will do before you can go look at, I looked it up, and the number of committees that were here. I think we have a lot of committees now. I looked at and I wrote them down. It was, they had the vestry, obviously, and the ACW. You had a finance, building, membership, public affairs, ushers, lay reader, memorial, a talent committee, gifts committee, and the altar guild.
It's like a mirror of Nativity, where they just mirrored exactly what Nativity Head Committee was.
Right. Well, they were still operating under that model, that they had all these different committees. So we don't have a finance committee. Big churches have that. Well, this little small church did it. And I looked at the names. There were very few people who were on two committees.
Yeah.
So when this was written, this church was much larger than we kind of remember. Like I said, hardly anybody served on two committees. The rector was the only one who was on all of it, and at the bottom was a little asterisk. He will attend as time permits. You can't be in all these different places.
In a lot of ways, the ebb and flow of membership here at St. Charles matches the continuum, where you have this initial growth phase for the first 20 years or so, and then it stalls.
Yeah, it stalls. And it just happened throughout the continuum. It stalled. The initial people that left over good emotional, logical reasons, so they had a momentum to leave. Well, then the kids and the folks coming in afterwards, why? And then it's like when I got here, I had to start correcting people. And somebody would visit and come in, and they would tell them everything they're against. Well, that's no way to win a friend. I'm against all this stuff. No. We're here for the gospel. We're here for this. And if somebody asks me about something, like the gentleman last night, how are you different from Nativity? I'll lay that out. I tell them. I don't start with that. I wait for them to bring it up. It's like when I was Sunday afternoon, I'm on my walk in the neighborhood, and some people stopped me and they said, "Aren't you a priest?" No, I wasn't not walking in this. I was in shorts, a couple of t-shirts, tennis shoes, and I was trying to get in before the rain started. And I said, "Well, yes, how do you always seen you in a collar?" And so, "What are you?" And they were Baptist, and I said, "I'm an Anglican." So is that like Episcopalian? No. And they said, "What's the difference?" Okay, this is the difference. And they're like, oh, okay. And they understood it, And then I could talk to them also because I was a former Baptist, so I was able to talk to them. And I never lead with them. And I never said, "I left the Baptist church because of this, and this." They asked me, "Why did you leave?" "Well, I left for this reason." So you build a rapport with somebody, and then, you show the differences. It's like one time I sat down with a Greek Orthodox priest, and as soon as I sat down, we hadn't even ordered our coffee, and he looked at me and he said, "Why aren't you Greek Orthodox?" I looked at him and I thought, well, I'm going to be a little mischievous. And I said, "Well, I can't sport that ZZ Top beard you have to wear." And he kind of looked at me, and I was like, "Come on, that's rude. You don't sit down with somebody and hit them like that, especially if you're of a different Christian denomination, religious denomination or church." So when people walk in, I've gotten people to quit saying what you're against. What are we here for? We're here for Jesus Christ. We're here for the gospel. We're here to save souls. How are you different from, say, our brothers and sisters across the street? That's not much of a difference. No, it's not. It might be to them, but it's not to us. And so that's the way.
And that's the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I'm sorry. St. Mary's across the street. Father Joy and all them wonderful people. So that's what you do. That's what happened in the continuing church. We were noted for what we were against, not what we are for. And that never brings converts in. That never brings, it's a negativity. You're starting off in a negatives. And it's always it's never worked. It never will work in that. The continuing church also, if you looked at it, they were constantly bickering. Bishops creating little fiefdoms and fighting, like the old Baron Wars of England and Europe back in the 1300s. And it was disgusting to see. Still disgusting to see when you see it going on now. And it still happens. Not as much, but when you see some bishops trying to get together and reform, like the Blues Brothers, reform the band, so many ulterior motives are in there, and you just kind of wish that generation would go to be with the Lord. And they are. I mean, years are going by, 40 years. Most of that generation that liked all the conflict and the bickering and everything else are becoming less and less. And we're getting more and more young people like you and Caleb, who's running our production right now, coming in. And they don't have that baggage. I don't have that baggage. I know it because I had to study it, but I don't have that baggage either. So as more and more people come in who are new, not tied, you're not going to have that baggage, and we're starting to see growth.
As someone who's relatively new to the continuing movement, I was not able to ascertain the difference between APEC, the ACC, the APA when I look into this. So
Yeah.
I think to
There's not.
seekers or
Yeah.
people looking at this for the first time, they're all indistinguishable, essentially.
Pretty much, they are. We have parishioners who have a vacation home up in North Tennessee, close to Huntsville. There's an APA, Anglican Province of America, parish up there. They go up there. I found it, said you can go to this parish. It's good. So they go, and they come back, they're like, it's almost exactly the same. Right. In the continuing church, you will find that, much like you will in a Roman Catholic church. So we can go across the street to St. Mary's, the Mass will be one way, and we can go to, say, the Basilica of St. Michael the Archangel in Pensacola, the Mass is going to be pretty much the right way. Now, the only time it'll be different is if you go to a parish, like St. Mary's, was it a friend of Christians? Is that the one here? Oh, I hope Dax doesn't kill me. Here, he's a Latin. Yeah, and that'll be different.
Or
Okay.
Lady of Sorrows or something like
Something
that.
like, yeah. Oh, well, don't worry, Dax is going to correct us here in a few minutes. But I just call it St. Mary's. That will be a difference. So in the continuing church, you're going to find very much a similarity. Now, even with the low church groups, such as the United Episcopal Church of North America, they're a very low church. You can walk in and you can recognize the liturgy. They may have fewer readings. You may not hear chanting, but you can sit there. You can bring your prayer book from here and go to a UECNA parish and sit down and open your prayer book, and there you are. That's exactly the same. So the difference you have, they asked Brother Charles, Archbishop Charles, who was a Archbishop of the Anglican Catholic Church back in the late 90s. He was given a talk, and somebody asked him a question, said, Archbishop, why is there so much division in the continuum? And he sat there for a minute, and he got up. He was kind of a theologian. He was a monk, kind of gentleman. And he came up to the podium, and he was listening. And everybody was like, okay, we're going to get some really profound theological, And he leaned into the microphone and said one word, sin. And went and sat down. And that's the only reason we are separated. The pride of men, the sin of man. The reason the church is fragmented is because of us. How we are, and nobody's willing to submit to God or to anyone else. And that's a problem you see even in the G3, which is trying to come together. You see all sorts of, the bishops are saying one thing, and then you get the priests together, and we're all going, what in the world are they doing? And I'm sure the laymen are going, what in the world are the priests doing? But it kind of rolls downhill. They should have never split back in the early 80s. They should have come together long before I went to that joint meeting in 2023. They should have none of this should have ever happened. But here we are.
Here we are.
And here we are. Hopefully, God willing, it will change sooner rather than later. So that's my prayer. So,
We do that at the end of every Mass.
yes, every Mass. It's in the prayer book. At the end of every Mass, I pray for Christian unity and church unity. That's the last prayer of the Mass. And I say it right there from the midst of the people, because it's our prayer. And we're lifting that up to God to heal our church. Not just St. Charles, and not just the Anglican continuum, but all Christian churches around the world, and especially in the West. Lord knows we need help, and I really pray the next Bishop of Rome, the next Pope, is a very good man. I know who I want him to be, but they haven't called and asked me yet. But I would love for it to be Cardinal Sarah. I think he would, if he'd been Pope after John Paul II, most of the problems you see going on here in the West would not have happened. He's a good, strong, orthodox, godly man. And if I can listen to him or read him, and I'm an Anglican, if I can listen to him or read him, I would. I know some Anglicans who are Cardinal Burke, another solid man. We can pray that a good solid man like Burke or Sarah becomes Pope. That would be a game changer for the West.
Or at least someone who's more on the conservative side, like the Pizza Ball or the
Somebody like
Hungarian
that,
guy, I think
yeah,
his name's
something that
Aaron.
would be better. That would be better. He obviously would have been. I was never a big fan of Francis. I remember when my friend David Langevin came to me at work. We have a new pope. Now, my undergraduate degree before I went to seminary was Latin America. So I studied the Latin Americans, the church in Latin America, the Jesuits, all this. We did it from a secular point of view, but we read a lot of church history also. So when David comes running so excited, I said, what's his name? Bergoglio. I said, oh man, we don't need another Italian. We just went through 400 years of Italians. He said, oh, no. He's a Jesuit from Argentina. If he was here, he'd tell you, I did this. I looked up to heaven, threw my hands up, said, God save us from the Jesuits and the Argentinians, the Latin Americans. Why? Liberation theology and the Jesuits, they haven't been solid in theology in 100 years. And when he first spoke, I thought, okay, I was wrong, God. I was wrong, mea culpa, because he talked about the devil. And then after that, he brought nothing but confusion, not only to the Catholic Church, but Christianity in the West in general.
He reminds me in a lot of ways of a conciliatory tech bishop in like the late 90s, early 2000s, where Francis would have an uncanny ability to like speak to both groups in a way to tell them what they want to hear.
Yeah, and then, he would, I kind of referenced it in my sermon on Sunday. Now, he was bringing this Abrahamic faith. He wanted to build a church for the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians. But who was going to have to give? Once again, the Christians are going to have to give in their doctrine so we don't upset and anger the Jews and the Muslims. They don't have to, but we do. And that was Francis. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. No. John Paul II, when he kissed the Quran, I was a Baptist at the time, and I was like, what? What's going on with this? We can love our Muslim neighbors, our Jewish neighbors. I have family members who are Jewish. I have extended family members who are Muslim. But the best way to love them is to tell them the truth, not to give in and compromise your faith or your Christian witness to the world to make them feel better. They don't. Why is everybody expecting? Why do bishops expect us to? In effect, you're denying Christ. And as Jesus says, if you deny me before men, I'll deny you before my Father. So whether Francis meant it or not, doing that, he was doing what? He was denying the uniqueness of Christ. I hope and pray, because we never condemn anybody to hell, and I don't want to be the one to say that. But when you do things like, if I did that, I put my soul in jeopardy when I compromise against Christ. But we didn't get here to talk about Francis. I just hope Sarah gets it. If the Vatican calls me, I'll tell them who they should pick. But
he's great on a lot of things, but I've read that Cardinal Sarah, is not friendly to the ordinariate, and that he's very hostile to married priests. And as you apply that to the ordinariate, it's negative.
Yeah, it's true. You have to understand something. What Benedict said versus what's being implemented is two different things. I flirted around with the ordinariate. Okay, you can be married. Anglican patrimony. You can have married priests. You know, so a priest who went into the ordinary had a son, like in Anglicanism. You know, one of my sons could follow me into the priesthood. That's something that's gone on in Anglicanism since the beginning. St. Patrick, his father and grandfather. His father was a deacon. His grandfather was a priest, and he became a bishop. So it's generational, and that's the patrimony of Anglicanism. So Benedict said something like that. And Cardinal Wuerl, no. And now in the ordinariate, priests cannot be married. Now, if you are married, you can stay that way. But if your son decides he wants to be a priest, well, he can't get. He has to be celibate, like the Latin rite of the Roman Catholic Church. Most folks think that what you see, the celibacy, one is a discipline, it's not a doctrine. Number two, not the entire Roman Catholic Church has celibate priests. The Eastern Catholics still have married priests. It's only in the West that they enforce this. So the ordinariate, the next generation, will have no married priest. So that part of the Anglican patrimony is gone. A lot of times they think they just kind of, I don't know if it's the right way to say this, ape an Anglican service. They have an Anglican patrimony. So we have humble access. We wear a fiddleback like the Anglicans do, which, you know, I'm one to talk. I wear a Gothic chasuble, which is Roman Catholic. We're Anglican patrimony. No, you're not. You're not Anglican. You're Roman Catholics who are incorporating some of our liturgical beliefs into it. And it's a beautiful service. I will give them that. It was a beautiful service to watch, just like an Anglican service, if you do it right, is beautiful. If we had the money and the altar serve and everything else, the service you see on Sunday would be notched up 4 or 5 levels. We just don't have that ability. But if you go to an ordinariate one, because they have the money of the Roman Catholic Church to pour into it, they fund it. And that's how they are able to do that. So no, he didn't. I know Francis wasn't really big on the ordinariate at first. He didn't see a need for it. Actually, under his pontificate, one of his cardinals, I hope I say this name correctly, Coco Palmentero, actually said we need to revisit Apostolic Kyrie because it was not done correctly. That's under Francis. So that's okay. One good thing about Francis, okay? Because it wasn't. It was political. It was not theological. I mean, if you read what the Roman Catholics theologians have said about it, it was pure political.
Yeah, it's like 1894, it's the height of the British Empire.
Yeah.
And
British Empire, they thought if they could declare our orders invalid, we would all clutch our pearls and run back to Rome. That's what Cardinal Vaughan had convinced Leo XIII would happen. And when it happened, and believe me, the magisterium, they said the magisterium did this. No, it was a very small group of the magisterium, of the cardinals, that did it. It was split 3 ways down the street. You know, 1/3 said, yes, they're invalid. 1/3 said, no, they're valid. 1/3 said, we need more information. Leo went with a minority position. And when it happened, you know, in the Anglican world, it was shock and outrage. In the Roman Catholic world, it was disbelief. What have you done? You can read that, you know, from some of the different books that were written, starting in the 1960s by Roman Catholic theologians and priests. And it kind of ignores the 2 papal bulls of the 1550s issued by popes then, when this was after Edward had died and Mary became queen. Archbishop of Canterbury, Cranmer, had been executed, and they brought in a new one. Who? He came from the Vatican. His job was to examine all Anglican orders. He did. And he said, they're valid. And so 2 successive popes in the 1550s said, Anglican orders are valid. The only issue they had was how you were assigning bishops to dioceses, because the Parliament and the king would have a say, and the Pope rightly said, the state has no say in who goes where. Now, he said, I do, but I don't agree with that either, but I agree with him saying the state has no authority to tell them where you can do it. So they're valid, but it's enlisted where they were placed. That was what was the papal bulls until the 1890s, and they ignored these 2 papal bulls to pass that. So you have 3 papal bulls from Roman Catholic popes. All 3 of them are equally valid. All 3 of them are law. Faithful Catholics have to obey them. You have two that say my orders are valid. You have one that says my orders are not valid. I had some troll get on one of them, Caleb showed me Sunday, talking about my orders being invalid, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to fake this, fake that. If you go to canon law in the Roman Catholic Church, my orders are perfectly valid. I'm an old Catholic, meaning my orders come through the Polish National Catholic Church, as do, I want to say, 99.9% of continuing priests and bishops. And I leave that 0.% because I might miss somebody. So we're all go through the Polish with the old Catholics. So Rome has a canon law saying that, let's say Father Joy and the church shut down over there by canon law. If there's no other Catholic church around, every one of those Roman Catholics can come over here and receive communion because I have a valid Eucharist here. That's Roman Catholic canon law. So for somebody to say that, one, they don't know. If they're Roman Catholic, they don't know Roman Catholic canon law. If they're Orthodox, well, they don't. Okay, the Orthodox, everybody's a heretic to the Orthodox. Yeah. So I just ignore that. But that's what happens. Sometimes we Anglicans are too loosey-goosey with things, and I'll admit that. Sometimes Rome paints themselves into a corner because they forget, because their church is so old, they forget what previous popes have said, which are binding through papal bulls. Okay? When Pope John Paul II issued his papal bull in 1993 on women's ordination. Pope Benedict actually, as Cardinal Ratzinger said, this is ex cathedra. This is from the chair. So when Francis starts talking about, we're going to look at women, you got a papal bull says no. You got a pope who spoke, and popes don't speak often from the chair. Very seldom, I think maybe less than a dozen times since the Middle Ages. When John Paul said from the chair, that shut down it. And there's no more talking, no more for the faithful Roman Catholics. You don't talk about it anymore. It's done. It's been set. So Francis was kind of worming his way around talking about it. He had two synods come up to look at it. Now, was he just doing it to mollify those who want female clergy? Or did he really?
Who knows?
Who knows? He was like an eel trying to figure out his theology.
We've covered a lot of ground, Father. It's a good episode.
Yep.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, we'll see y'all next time.